My name is Matthew Celia, and I'm really excited to be here with my friends from Canon to talk to the Sundance audience about how I create 180-degree cinematic VR. I really wish we could have been together in Park City. But this might be the next best thing, because no matter where you are in the world, we are streaming this in VR, shot on Canon's new dual fisheye lens with their EOS R5 body. Because we're in VR, if you have a headset, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause. I want you to click that watch later button. Go grab your headset and watch this in VR, because then you can really experience the immersive feeling of 180-degree VR. And for those of you on a desktop or smartphone, it's no problem. You can still get a great experience because it does look pretty awesome. We're here today for a couple reasons. One, you might be a storyteller who's interested in getting into immersive filmmaking. And two, Canon just made this a lot easier with the new EOS VR system. It's a cool camera and lens, and I'm really excited to talk about it today. Let me give you a little bit of background about who I am. I started as a traditional filmmaker. I made short films and documentaries and music videos. And then about 6 years ago, my now business partner and then manager said to me, hey, I think VR is going to be pretty cool and very big. And I took a look at it and was really taken with the medium. That idea that I could feel like I was there in the place struck me as being so cool and so immersive and also so new, and I loved it. So 6 years ago, we started a company called Lightsail VR with a mission to bring story first into the medium, to tell stories that felt right for the medium. And that really resonated with a lot of folks. So I'm here today to share my knowledge and share some of my tips and tricks about what I think immersive storytelling is, and hopefully inspire you to do some cool stuff. So what is immersive storytelling? Well, I'll tell you, I think it's a new medium. And this is important, and it's an important way of how I approach every project. Because for me, it's not about black and white to color, or even 2D to 3D. There's something fundamentally different about how audiences consume this media. And really, it comes down to one thing: agency. With immersive storytelling, we are handing over some of that traditional controlling narrative back to the audience. And I find that incredibly empowering, right? Because now they can really experience it. And because they can experience it, I find they form a stronger connection to the work. But it is a spectrum. On one side, you've got 2D, flat images, which can be cool, and they are cool, right? Very cool cinema. And on the other end of the immersive spectrum, you've got like the holodeck, right? You've got motion-tracked suits and AI that talks to you, and everything's interactive, and you are the story, right? But I love this area in the middle. And I love this area where it's still a lean-back experience. I can still be an artist and a filmmaker, but I can create something magical and transport someone into a new world to tell a new story. What is it like to be in someone else's shoes? What is it like to be in a different environment that maybe they can't go visit? I find this really powerful. Today, people consume content mostly on their smartphones, right? And there is a version of immersive that works on a smartphone. You may have seen, dragging with your finger or moving it around. Maybe you're doing that right now. And that's giving you a little bit of agency, that magic window into the world. But for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm really going to focus in on headsets. Because for me, virtual reality really begins when we can block out everything of the world that you're in and replace it with something I'm creating, or you're creating, hopefully. So my journey as a filmmaker kind of started with this. I said, what is great about this medium? And for me, it boiled down to one word, and that word was presence. And I actually had to look up the word presence, because it's one of those words you use a lot, but you don't really know the definition of. And Merriam-Webster writes that presence is the fact of being in a particular place. Now, because we're trying to create the feeling of being there, and because that's what I thought was so great about this medium, some of the 2D film techniques I found when I first started didn't really work that well. The first thing I had to get over was lensing. There's just no lensing here. There's no close-up or medium or wide. And that was something, as a traditional filmmaker, I used a lot to tell the story. You know, there was a lot of emotional weight between being really far or being really tight with the subject. Instead, I really had to think about what was it like to be there? Where's the best spot to stand in the room? If we're trying to recreate the feeling of being there and being present, it's a fixed perspective. We're going to see everything from our eyes and from our point of view. And we want to make it feel very authentic and natural. At least that's what worked best for me. Perspective also rarely changes in a single scene. I've seen a few VR pieces where they have attempted to do like over the shoulder coverage and a wide shot in a very traditional blocking directorial format. And that was a cool experiment, but it didn't make me feel present. And that made me feel like, well, I don't know if we're taking full advantage of everything this medium has to offer. It felt very stuck in between two mediums. The other thing that I think a lot of modern cinematography is based on is moving the camera, creating Dutch angles, flying through a scene. Some really impressive stuff. But I'll say that in immersive cinema, I don't think it works very well. There's a couple of reasons. Our body not moving and our eyes thinking we're moving can kind of destabilize us and make us feel sick. But also, frankly, you could be moving in your headset even though the camera right there is static. So coming from 2D, I had to learn all these things. And I did a lot of experimentation. I made a lot of stuff that made me definitely woozy in the headset. All right, let's break it down. 2D, the director of photography, the director's controlling the view via lensing, right? The viewer, you, sees the action in front of you. Everything that I make is prescribed. I'm telling you what to focus on. It's not as immersive, but I can hide my crew, I can hide my lights, I can really art direct each frame of the cinematic experience. And then, as a filmmaker, I jumped into 360, right? Which is the complete opposite. I suddenly gave over all elements of control to you. You could experience the frame however you wished, which meant that it was a lot harder for me to know where you were looking. And I had to think about, how am I going to keep your attention here and make sure that you're not watching the wall or your feet the whole time, right? Because even though you could look anywhere, you still can only see in one direction. And because you can look anywhere, as a filmmaker, I had to think about the whole frame. I had to think, okay, this location's really awesome, I love this, but what do I think about this? Maybe it doesn't look as good, right? And then even if it did look as good, oh, where am I going to put the crew? Where am I going to stand? How am I going to hide my lights? These are all challenges that I actually relish in overcoming. And I usually stood behind the camera and painted myself out in post, which was a lot of extra work. But it was also a lot of extra work. And that meant that sometimes my vision couldn't be as big, and what I wanted to accomplish had to be scaled down because I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how to accomplish these technical hurdles. So then, 180-degree VR kind of came into the picture, and it struck a really cool balance with me, right? Because now I can control at least the front half of what you're looking at. You, as the audience, still have a little bit of that agency to look around and feel totally immersed. The stereoscopic 3D was usually a lot better. The viewer sees all this action in front of them, and I can still hide my crew, hide my lights. I could operate in a way that was a little more comfortable as a traditional filmmaker. And I don't ever say like, hey, I'm doing it just because it's easy. I'm doing it because it's right. This is how I break it down. For me, 180 is a medium of people, right? Because you're here with me at this workshop, learning some tips, it makes a lot of sense that we're here in 180. If we were traveling and I wanted to show you some epic castles or some waterfalls, I might choose to shoot that in 360 instead and give you more agency to look around and experience. I might control that because I maybe only want you to look at one particular thing. Those are creative choices. But I like to say that 180 is a medium of people, and 360 is storytelling through place. So I just want to take a second now to talk a little bit more specifically about the advantages of 180. okay? First, there's no stitching required. If you have any friends who have been working in immersive for the last several years, you'll know that stitching is incredibly difficult. Just to break it down, for those who may not know, stitching is something a lot of 360 cameras have to do, because we film on several cameras that all look around the world, right? And you're taking an angle from this camera and an angle from this camera, for example, and let's say they see a tree in the distance, and you're telling the computer, hey, that tree that both these cameras see, that's the same tree. So we're going to stitch it together in a seamless panorama, okay? The problem with that is that there is a little bit of difference between these two cameras. And so stuff that's really far away might work out, stuff that's closer may not. And then when you balance those, one or the other gets out along that seam line. And that's the hard part about stitching. With the dual fisheye, like we used to capture 180-degree VR, we still have to do a little bit of work. We have to unwrap each fisheye into that equirectangular spherical projection. But that's it. We really don't have to worry about the artifacts and the stitch lines that happen. So that makes your post-production a lot faster to get started. I also want to point out that VR, 180-degree VR is a higher resolution. And the way to understand this best, I think, is if you think about pixels per degree, right? So on this system here, this is shooting 180 degrees with an 8K full-frame sensor, okay? That means we have 8K worth of pixels to fill out 180 degrees of picture. If I was to shoot the same 8K sensor and have to capture 360 degrees of picture, I would have half as many pixels per degree. So it would look half as sharp. I like to say that 180-degree VR is twice as sharp. That means it looks better in non-VR applications as well. It looks pretty great. One more thing I really like about shooting 180-degree VR is that I can use accessible cameras. Remember we talked about stitching, right? And we talked about that errors needing to be close together. That means you want to use smaller cameras traditionally so that you have less parallax, so your stitching is a little easier. But that means you can't use nice big full-frame sensors most of the time. So what's cool about this is I can use the R5, which is a tremendous 8K full-frame sensor, and I can have all that color science. And I also have that established workflow. Like I already know how to grade it, I know how to work with it because it's been out a while. All I'm doing is adding the new dual fisheye, and suddenly a whole world of immersive cinematic filmmaking is open to me. It's pretty cool. Because I'm only really worried about that front, I also don't need to hide crew. I don't need to hide any lights. And I think that makes my job as a filmmaker just a little bit easier, so I can focus more about what I want people to look at and not all the stuff technically that I hope they don't. I will say that ultimately, it's the familiarity to 2D productions that I think makes this really awesome. And I hope that means more people will get into it because the barrier to entry is a little lower, and then we'll see some more creative work. But, and this is a big but, I don't want you going into making 180-degree VR with a 2D mindset. It is a very, very different medium, as I've learned over the last several years. So what I'm here to do today is really share with you my top 10 tips on creating beautiful cinematic 180-degree VR. Let's get started. Tip number 1, determine who your audience is. When creating that sense of presence, your audience is going to feel like they are in the scene. And I break this down into 3 categories. The first category, I would say, is a passive viewer. And this is someone who's not acknowledged in the scene. Maybe the scene doesn't contain any people, like this shot that I took on a local hiking trail. It's really beautiful. Nice little creek, some trees, just calming and relaxing. And I don't need to be acknowledged in the scene. So I call that passive. Another way that your audience can be is what I call the sidekick character. And the sidekick character works really well for stories that are about embodiment. So in this clip, from a series that I directed called Now Your Turn, you play as someone at a board game table with your friends playing a board game. And as the turn passes around from person to person, Becca Scott turns to us and says,
Your turn. You get to either up that bid or you can pass as well. You're going to pass back to Vince.
Well, yes.
You're acknowledged to be a part of the scene, but also because you have hands, there's a bit of embodiment. You are actually part of the narrative there, and that's why you're a sidekick. But I think my favorite role that your audience can be is the guest. And this doesn't imply any interactivity, which I think is important, because the sidekick role honestly can get a little problematic because you can't actually interact with the narrative. So the guest feels the most authentic, and it feels the most natural to me. By guest, I mean what we're doing right now. I'm acknowledging that you're here with me, and you're here in this space. And that breaking the fourth wall, that eye contact, that's creating a connection between us. And that can happen a lot in your narratives. In fact, I like to say that eye contact is the close-up of immersive media, because it's that time that we feel most connected and that it's most resonant between the two of us. So in this clip here, I'm playing the piano and I'm noodling around on the keyboard, but I'm also joking and laughing and talking straight to the camera, and I'm creating that kind of immersion. And that's what's going to keep your audience feeling present. Tip number 2. Take advantage of the stereoscopic 3D for immersion. There's a lot of technical reasons why this works, but for me, stereoscopic is what really drives that immersive experience. You do want to know a little bit about what you're doing with the 3D. So I'm going to give you a few tips. First of all, your strongest 3D effect is going to be in the front 120 degrees of your image, and it'll kind of fall away towards the sides, okay? You also need to think about and understand how lenses capture and how 3D works. So I'm going to give you a bit of a primer. The first thing is IPD, or intrapupillary distance, or if you really want to break it down, it's just the distance between your two eyes. So the new Canon fisheye, dual fisheye lens has an IPD of about 60 millimeters, which is close to most people's IPD. And what's really important about that is if we're trying to create presence, right, and make people feel like they're there, we also want the world to look, and the stereo to look the way that people experience it, just like our eyes. If our lenses are too far apart, everything's gonna look exaggerated, right? If our lenses are too close together, everything's gonna feel less 3D. It's just not gonna feel super realistic, right? So early on, when people were exploring this medium, they were using other camera bodies and other fisheye lenses, and they were kind of putting them together, but the IPD typically was too far apart, and that made for a really uncomfortable experience for most people. That's not what we want. We want people to have a comfortable virtual reality experience. The other problem with using two separate camera bodies, for example, is line level sync. I think a lot of people thought that they could just synchronize on audio, but the way that camera sensors capture is usually top to bottom. As you put the two different cameras together in a myriad of configurations, if that line level sync isn't perfect, you're gonna get some disparity. And disparity is like, if I'm waving my hand like this, in my left eye, my hand might be here. In my right eye, my hand might be here. And because it's at two different points in time, when I watch that back, it looks a mess. And it's kind of stroby, and I may not know exactly what's wrong with it, but I do know that it's uncomfortable to watch. Luckily, none of those problems exist on this, and that is why I think that this makes it so accessible. Because the dual fisheye is recording to a single 8K full-frame sensor, I don't have any line-level sync problems, no matter how long I run. Same thing goes for color. Using two different camera bodies means that I could potentially have issues in the color. I could have a setting wrong, or maybe just the sensor heats up and suddenly my blues are a little more warm, right? And that color disparity also causes this stereoscopic image to look less good, okay? So I think that that's pretty smart. This system solves a lot of issues that plagued early 180-degree VR films. There are some things you do need to still keep in mind. So first of all, you also need to think about keeping your camera level. So I usually use a little level here, although the camera's firmware does have a leveler on it, which is very, very handy. And the reason you want it level is something called vertical disparity, right? So vertical disparity is when one eye is like tilted like this. So imagine walking around the world with like your head permanently tilted. It's not very comfortable. And if you've seen some very poor stereoscopic, usually it's the vertical disparity that's throwing it off. You also want to make sure that your lenses are clean. And I know that sounds like little 101 stuff, but it is really important because particularly if you have dust or a smudge on one lens but not the other, it's going to create some issues, right? It's going to feel like I wear glasses, like maybe water just splashed up on one lens. And that takes the visuals and makes it not look as great. So make sure your lenses are clean, and then also make sure that there's no like weird specular highlights or flare that's only pinging one lens. The real goal of this is for me to say that what you see in one eye and what you see in the other eye should be the same, just offset 60 millimeters, right? Offset slightly. One of the things I really do like about this system too is the focus, right? You've got a nice big focus ring up here, but you also have the ability to go and focus just each lens individually and punch in using the LCD panel to really get that critical focus, which is hard to do with fisheye lenses. So they've done a nice job, and like when I've used this in the field, I feel like I'm able to achieve critical focus a lot easier than with some of the other systems. So distance for your stereoscopic effect is also really important. Here's a clip of me being far too close to the camera. And this, if you're watching in headset, probably is super uncomfortable, aside from the fact that I'm standing, 6 inches from your face, which is, story-wise, also super uncomfortable. But just from a pure technical reason, it's just too close. A lot of stereographers that I talk to kind of have the 1 to 30 rule. And the 1 to 30 rule says whatever your IPD is, in this case 60 millimeters, multiply that by 30, and that is your quote-unquote minimum stereo distance. I don't know if I would consider that minimum because I've definitely shot pieces that are a little closer than that, and I still feel like they feel good and okay. But this is something you would want to test. That minimum distance, according to that rule on this system, is about 6 feet. But I think really the sweet spot's probably like 3.5 feet to maybe 15 feet. And that's the other thing. You don't want to be too far away either. Here in this clip, I'm way, way, way far away that you can barely see me. And not only is that bad because you can't see me, but it's also not great because we've lost all of that powerful stereo and the world just kind of still feels kind of flat. Because after about 15, 20 feet, we lose that powerful stereo. So finding that right balance is important. Here is a storyboarding chart that I tend to use that helps me figure out not only keeping it to that 120 degrees, like center kind of field, but also my distance. And from top down, I can start to think about how I'm planning the blocking of my sets and my actors and all the various components to create something nice. Also, let's talk about frame rate. Because a lot of you are probably traditional filmmakers like I was, and we all love shooting at 24p because it's super cinematic and gorgeous. But when watching in a headset, 24p is not comfortable. It's too stroby, there's too much motion blur. So 30 is where you should start. This system records 8K at 30, which I love. It also does 4K at 60, which I think looks really good too. And in the case of doing something that's fast motion or a lot of action, you may want to check out that mode. Tip number 3. Use blocking and art direction to help tell your story. Remember, we don't have close-ups. We don't have the wide shots. We don't have all that lensing or camera movements as tools in our cinematic tool bag. But you know what we do have? We have art. We have a way to make the world look the way we want and help guide attention. So you see, today on this desk here, I put a few items around to kind of frame me up in the center. And that draws the attention towards me in the frame. I'm no art director, but I think it's important to think about how that blocking tells your story. You also should think about your center crop. So one of the nifty cool features of the firmware here is that you can see the YouTube crop, which is that little center thing that if you're watching on desktop and you haven't moved around the frame at all, that's your default view. And that was super helpful in determining how much head height I have or how much of this desk that we're going to see. So here is a storyboard template that I tend to use. It's got that center crop where I can really focus on what I'm going to make my main action, but it also accounts for the whole 180 degrees. So I can put in fun things like some color changing lights over there, a little bit of cinematography, lighting gack over here, just to help add to the story and the flavor. Tip number 4. Use picture-in-picture. we don't necessarily have a close-up, right? And getting too close is not great for stereoscopic. So what do you do when you want to see small objects? Like if you want to see this camera closer, what would you do? Well, take a 2D camera and also capture this image right here. We can put that right there as like a picture-in-picture overlay. I like to call this AR in VR, right? And this is a tremendously successful way, I think, to tell those kind of close-up stories, to highlight some of those details without breaking the immersive space. Tip number 5. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about movement for a little bit. And that's because I think so many people want to move the camera. And it's also because 180-degree VR, you actually can move the camera without needing to paint out track or use fancy robots or anything like that. Like, because you can put this on a Steadicam or a jib and get that movement. But I really want you to think hard about why you're moving the camera and how you're moving the camera so that it is good for the story. I've done a lot of tests. I've gotten pretty green in a headset because I've moved the camera the wrong way. And the one thing I want to tell you is you have to keep that horizon level. No dutching, don't tilt up or down, right? Forward motion is the most comfortable. A little push forward looks really good, and I really, really like it. Here's a really good example of smooth motion. This was shot on a techno crane, moving at a very consistent speed, slowly as we push in. It's a really beautiful scene, and it's motion done really effectively because we feel like we're following the character as they disappear into the forest. Here's some shots of me with my kids outside my house. I actually mounted the camera on a gimbal and balanced it and I'm hand-holding it, which I don't necessarily recommend because you get a little bit of bounce in the fourth axis. It's not easy to keep it perfectly level, but could work in a pinch and definitely could work with a little bit more practice. But I really wanted to point out the differences between perfectly smooth techno-crane shots and handheld outside on a gimbal. Here's another motion shot that's really nauseating. I attached the camera to a chest harness and I'm climbing a ladder outside my house. This is the kind of POV shot that a lot of people think works incredibly well in VR, and it really doesn't. It just makes you super nauseous and super sick. So for those watching in headset, I am sorry. Lateral motion is tough, and it feels nauseating. And even worse is turning. Like turning this way and this way as you're like walking through some hallways. It's the worst. So do some testing if you're gonna do something with motion to make sure that it looks good in the headset and make sure it doesn't make anyone queasy. That is my tip on motion. Tip number 6, don't give your audience a reason to turn around. Remember, we're striving for presence. And when creating something for 180-degree VR, right, we wanna keep people focused on the front. In this case, you're focused on me. I remember there was a piece that I watched that was at a concert, and the artist came to the stage and lifted up his mic and was like, everyone roared, and he did this, and like the crowd roared behind me, and the first thing I wanted to do when I watched that was turn around. And so I did, but it was empty back there, right? It would have been really strong if maybe they just cut to the crowd, which is something that you can totally do, right? It wouldn't have broken the immersion so much for me to be reminded that I'm only seeing stuff in front of me. And remember that 180-degree VR is a medium in its own right with strengths that we have to play to. And that, for me, is a little more of a lean-back experience. Tip number 7, let's talk about lighting, okay? Lighting in 180-degree VR is challenging. And I think it's challenging for most cinematographers because it's kind of a wide frame. Where do you put the lights? Can't really bring in a flag or bring in a bunch of stuff to kind of like shape it. Yeah, I think you just have to get a little creative. So the first tip I have for you is try to use practicals like lamps, things that kind of naturally exist in the scene to kind of give you that light. And then the second tip I have for you is because you may not be moving the camera, you can always paint out lights by shooting what's known as a clean plate, where after you're done capturing, we take out all the lights and we shoot them without. So that's kind of what we've done here. So if you'll see, that's what it looked like before the clean plate. And that's what it looked like after we shot the clean plate. Pretty cool. The other thing you need to watch out for, and this relates to lighting, is your gear. I like to tell people that this seems pretty obvious at 180 degrees, but also remember down below and up top. And so you'll notice that this system here, I've actually used a monopod and a clamp to offset the camera from the tripod so that it no longer sees the legs of the tripod. And I think that that's a pretty good way to do this, because then I don't have to paint out the tripod legs. Here's a clip where I've actually put the camera between the sun and myself. So the sun's casting a shadow of the camera all over me, which doesn't look very good and is really hard to paint out in post. So do be aware when you're capturing with your lighting about where your shadows are falling. A better way to shoot this scene would have been for me to either move over into the shade or simply rotate 90 degrees and put that camera shadow on the ground where I could have easily painted it out. Tip number 8, please think about your post-production. One of the big differences with this over digital cameras is that we still have to take the dual fisheye and unwrap them into equirectangular spherical projections. And that is an added step, right? So it's also an 8K file, and you need that resolution in order for it to look really good. That means their files are big. And I think as digital filmmakers, we maybe become a little too lax about just hit and roll and letting it go and taking retakes and setting up and making notes and not hitting cut. So what I want you to do is think of this system more as film, right? Capture the moments you need. It'll let you record longer, and the stuff that you'll process will be less. So your hard drives and your post team will thank you for that. Tip number 9. I can't go through this whole presentation and not talk about audio, because audio is a large part of the immersive filmmaking world. We're not doing this in spatial audio today. I wish that we were. But if you do spatial audio, it is very immersive. You can put a ambisonic mic right on your camera, and that will capture the spatial sound, but please don't stop there. One of the things that I encourage you to do is use a lavalier on your talent, or maybe even if you're in a studio like we are today, a boom mic that you can then paint out when you paint out your lights. Having good quality sound is important, and you can still use all of those techniques and just spatialize it in post. Tip number 10, and this is my last tip, and maybe my most important, and that is to just be your own filmmaker. And you could take my advice because I've shot a lot of this stuff and I've had some experience, or you can experiment and do what you feel is best for your story. My advice here is really simple though. It's to make sure that you're keeping your audience present in the scene, because I think that is the power of 180-degree immersive cinematic filmmaking, okay? Cinematic filmmaking in this format is different than 2D, but it's also the same. Remember, you have to have a compelling story. You have to have something cool that we want to watch, that we're engaged in, that's going to give us that emotional resonance, okay? It's still mostly a lean-back experience, just like 2D is. I want to be entertained. I want to sit and enjoy, and lots of people want to feel that way. And also, it's captured on a camera with real people, with real pixels. Okay, that's all I've got for today. Thanks so much for being with me. My name is Matthew Celia. I hope you go out and are inspired to create immersive cinema as much as I am. Thanks again, and I'll see you later.